I'm Nora Marinello, 26, and I built my life from scratch, working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. For years, I paid the bills, picked up the slack, and kept my family from falling apart. But on my birthday, when my dad sold my laptop to buy my sister a phone and told me to be grateful, I made a decision that changed everything. Ever been taken for granted by the people you sacrificed everything for? If you have, drop your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I dive in, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to choose peace over approval, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about setting boundaries and taking your power back. What happened next, you won't believe. I grew up in a house where fairness was never the goal, function was. My dad used to joke that I was born sensible, as if that excused everything they expected of me. From a young age, I understood my role: keep things running, don't ask for too much, and definitely don't fall apart. My parents weren't monsters. That's what made it harder to explain. They didn't scream or throw things. They just expected. Quietly. Constantly. My sister, Gwendolyn, was the one they hovered around. She had food preferences that changed weekly. She'd panic over forgotten homework or minor fevers, and Mom would drop everything to comfort her. Meanwhile, I once split my knee open during recess and got a text from Dad, "Still walking? Then it's fine." Gwendolyn was 2 years younger, but people assumed she was the oldest. She was softer, more emotional, more visibly fragile. And my parents interpreted that as value. She needed more, so I had to need less. Simple math. By middle school, I was already filling gaps most kids wouldn't notice. I figured out how to get our Wi-Fi reconnected after Dad forgot to pay the bill. I memorized everyone's schedules because my parents rarely confirmed rides or appointments. When our kitchen sink clogged for the 3rd time in a month, I watched 3 hours of plumbing videos on YouTube and fixed it myself. Dad thanked me with a head nod, then asked if I could look at the dryer next. In high school, things just intensified. I picked up a job at the local grocery store sophomore year. The original plan was to save up for a second-hand laptop. But by my 3rd paycheck, I was covering utilities because the gas bill had slipped through the cracks. It wasn't framed as neglect, it was always we're a team. And being part of that team meant contributing. My contribution just happened to be money. Gwendolyn, meanwhile, had a dance recital every other week. New costumes, private lessons, professional makeup for performances. Mom made scrapbooks of each event. For my school awards night, where I received 2 academic scholarships, she arrived 20 minutes late and left before they called my name. "Sorry," she said. Gwendolyn had a costume fitting. At 16, Gwendolyn got a gold iPhone and driving lessons from Dad. I got a reminder to renew our auto insurance, which had quietly been in my name since I was 14. When I brought it up, Dad laughed. "You're better with that kind of stuff. You always have been." And I believed that. I believed that being responsible meant being invisible. That invisibility was the cost of stability. I told myself this was just the dynamic. Every family has one, right? The emotional child and the logical one. The one who needs comfort and the one who provides it. I thought my usefulness was a kind of love. Maybe it was. But it didn't feel like love. Senior year, I applied to college without help. Gwendolyn had a whole committee: Mom, Dad, her dance coach, even a family friend who was good with applications. I filled out mine after work, between closing shifts and late-night homework. When I got into a solid state school with a partial scholarship, I told them at dinner. Dad barely looked up from his phone. Mom said, "That's great, honey. Hey, Gwendolyn, did you remember to text Rachel about carpool for rehearsal?" That night, I stayed up and mapped out how much I'd need to save to cover what the scholarship didn't. I already knew the answer wouldn't come from them. It wasn't just the money. It was the pattern. Gwendolyn's broken phone? Emergency. My cracked screen? Be more careful. Her missed curfew? She's just tired. Me asking for an extension on the electric bill I'd been paying? Well, if it's that tight, maybe you need to manage your hours better. I stopped expecting things. No one noticed. When the hot water stopped working, I fixed the water heater. When Gwendolyn caught the flu and Mom stayed up with her all night, I worked a double shift and restocked the fridge. I bought my own winter coat. I negotiated down the interest rate on one of their credit cards. Gwendolyn once told me I had main character energy, which was hilarious, because in our family, I wasn't even in the supporting cast. Still, I kept showing up. Not because I thought they'd change, but because I didn't know what it looked like to stop. I thought being good at holding things together meant I had to hold everything. Even when no one asked. Even when they forgot I was there. 1 week before my 18th birthday, Gwendolyn had a meltdown over a group chat. Some friend drama I didn't fully understand. She cried through dinner, and Mom sat with her for hours. I washed the dishes, cleaned the living room, and checked our bank app. Our internet payment was overdue again. I transferred $86 from my account and made the payment. At midnight, Dad poked his head into my room and said, "Thanks for picking up the slack again. You're a rock, kid." It should have meant something, but all I felt was tired. By the time college started, I was living in a shared apartment off campus, taking early morning shifts at a logistics warehouse and attending lectures in the afternoon. Gwendolyn was still home, still going to high school, still getting everything she needed. Sometimes I'd come home to a text from Mom, "Gwendolyn's having a tough week. Can you Venmo $50 so she can do something nice for herself?" "No, how are you?" "No, can you spare it?" Just expectation. I always sent it. It took years to realize that being the strong one isn't an identity. It's a role people put you in when they want to stop showing up. They see that you won't fall apart and use that as permission to disappear. And when you finally do speak up, they act surprised, like you've changed, like you're suddenly difficult. Like strength wasn't supposed to come with limits. But mine did. And eventually, I reached it. The day it happened wasn't even dramatic. It was quiet. Just a message. One that told me everything I needed to know about what I meant to them. And what I didn't. When I moved back home after my second year of college to save money, things were already off. I knew it, even if I didn't say anything out loud. The tension wasn't sudden, it had been growing in the corners for years, like mold. But now it was in plain sight. Gwendolyn had just graduated high school, and the house revolved around her. Every meal, every conversation, every calendar date centered on her next steps. My parents made a big production out of her acceptance to a private college that cost more per semester than I'd paid for my entire year. She worked so hard, my mom kept saying. "We're just so proud." I said nothing. Because the year before, when I got accepted into the university's honors program with a partial academic scholarship, no one threw a party. Dad asked, "What does that mean exactly?" and went back to watching the game. Gwendolyn's acceptance came with balloons, cake, a congratulatory Instagram post from Mom, and a shopping trip for dorm essentials. She posted a selfie from Bed Bath & Beyond holding pink towels and captioned it, #NextChapter. I paid our water bill that morning before heading to my shift. Living at home was supposed to help me save. But I quickly realized the math didn't work. My parents expected rent, not officially, but in the form of covering utilities, groceries, and occasionally Gwendolyn's Uber rides or nail appointments. If I pushed back, Dad would say, "You're lucky we let you stay here for free." Free. As if my contributions didn't count because they weren't requested with a formal invoice. Gwendolyn stopped thanking me for things. If she needed a ride, she'd drop her keys on the kitchen counter and say, "I need your car." If I asked where she was going, she'd roll her eyes. "Why do you care?" One morning, she took the car without asking. I had class. I ended up walking 3 miles and showing up 40 minutes late. When I finally got my car back, the front bumper was scraped and the passenger mirror was hanging by a thread. She shrugged. "You should have told me the brakes felt soft." "That's on you." I stood there, holding the broken mirror in my hand, not even surprised. The only thing I felt was stupid for expecting anything else. That week, I opened the mail and found a letter from her college. I wasn't snooping, it had my name on it. A notice confirming the deposit had been paid from a joint account that still had my name on it from when I was 17. They'd used my savings, about $1,300, without asking. Just gone. I showed the letter to Dad. He didn't even blink. "We figured you wouldn't mind." You're always talking about how you're trying to build a credit score. Consider it part of being invested in your sister's future. My sister's future. The phrase sat in my stomach like lead. I was still figuring out how to afford my next semester. I was balancing shifts at the bookstore, trying to keep my GPA high enough to maintain my scholarship, and they were spending my money like I was some kind of silent donor. I tried to bring it up with Mom. She softened her voice, like I was being unreasonable for asking. We're all in this together, sweetie. Gwendolyn's just starting out. She needs more help right now. Right now. It was always right now. Gwendolyn had needed more help when she was 12 and forgot her homework. When she was 14 and failed math. When she was 16 and got dumped before homecoming. Every version of right now came with a redistribution of energy from me to her. Then came the phone. It was my birthday. I was 21. No party, no dinner. I hadn't expected anything. I was working that night anyway. But around noon, I got a text from Dad, sold your laptop. Your sister needed a new phone. Be grateful we still feed you. I stared at the screen, rereading it twice. My laptop, the one I bought secondhand and used for school and work, was gone. Sold. Without warning. A minute later, another text came in. Also, you'll cover her tuition, $8,000 by Friday. I didn't reply right away. I just stood there in the bookstore stockroom, surrounded by unopened boxes and fluorescent lights humming overhead. It was like the ground shifted a little. Like something that had been off-kilter for years finally snapped fully out of alignment. When I finally texted back, not a chance, it felt like throwing a stone into a well and never hearing it hit the bottom. His response came quick. Then pack your things. You're cut off. No argument. No discussion. Just that. A line in the sand I didn't draw, but one I wasn't willing to cross. It wasn't just about the laptop. Or the tuition. It was everything before it. The time I gave. The money I gave. The silence I gave. Years of absorbing expectations so quietly that no one noticed I'd been disappearing. Now, the expectation had grown so big it swallowed my name. I wasn't even a person to them, I was a resource. I told myself I shouldn't be surprised. That I'd seen it coming. And I had. The signs were everywhere. The comments about me being so stable. The way my wins became quiet footnotes while Gwendolyn's minor efforts were treated like Nobel-level achievements. The slow erasure of my boundaries. The assumption that I would never say no. I went to work that evening, finished my shift, and didn't go home. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't do anything dramatic. I just stopped. Stopped answering. Stopped explaining. Stopped playing a role I never auditioned for in the first place. That night, I slept on a friend's couch. I stared at the ceiling for hours, thinking about what kind of person takes their daughter's laptop on her birthday and calls it generosity because they still let her eat. I thought about the day Gwendolyn crashed my car and said it was my fault. The time she overdrew the joint account and blamed me for not tracking it better. The week she lost her dorm key and had Mom drive 2 hours to bring her a spare, but only after calling me and yelling for 10 minutes first. And I realized something that changed everything. None of this would stop. Not unless I stopped it. They weren't going to wake up one day and see me. They weren't going to apologize. They weren't going to understand, even if I wrote it out in bullet points and begged them to read it. Because they didn't want to see it. They were comfortable. And I was the reason they could stay that way. So I left. Quietly. On a Tuesday. And the next morning, I left them something they couldn't ignore. Something that didn't ask for attention but commanded it. Because sometimes the only way to be heard is to stop speaking. And let the silence do the rest. I was behind the counter at the coffee shop when the text came in. The grinder was going, customers were talking, the usual background noise of a slow weekday morning. I remember it wasn't even the vibration that caught my attention, it was the preview. 5 words on my lock screen, sold your laptop. Be grateful. At first I thought it was a joke. A badly timed, tone-deaf joke from someone trying to be clever. But it was from Dad. No context. No apology. Just that. I stepped into the back room to read the full message. Sold your laptop. Your sister needed a new phone. Be grateful we still feed you. No punctuation. No, happy birthday. Just a statement like it was completely reasonable to pawn my only piece of working tech to buy Gwen Dallin an iPhone. Before I had time to respond, a second message came in. You'll also cover her tuition, $8,000. By Friday. I stared at the screen for a long time. The number felt unreal. Not because I didn't believe he meant it, but because I knew he absolutely did. I texted back, not a chance. The reply came instantly. Then pack your things. You're cut off. I didn't answer. I didn't react. I didn't even blink. I just turned my phone face down and stared at the blank wall behind the espresso machine for a full minute. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even shock. It was clarity. This wasn't a turning point. It was the end point. It wasn't just the laptop. That was the spark, sure. But everything had been flammable for years. The expectations, the dismissals, the slow, steady erosion of what counted as fair. What made it worse, what still catches in my throat when I think about it, is that he thought he was right. He believed it. That I owed them. That my life, my effort, my resources were all just part of some family pool they could dip into without warning. And when I said no, just one word, typed in lowercase, without emotion, it was enough to get me evicted from the life I'd spent years holding together. I didn't go home that night. I didn't tell anyone right away. I finished my shift, stocked the milk fridge, wiped down the counters, and clocked out like it was any other Tuesday. Then I walked 4 blocks in the dark and sat on the curb outside a 24-hour diner until my friend Brianna came to get me. I told her everything in 10 minutes, monotone, like I was reciting a list. She offered her spare bedroom without hesitation. No questions. No conditions. I slept hard that night. Not peacefully, just completely. Like my body knew I couldn't carry the weight anymore and took the choice away from me. The next morning, I went back. Not to talk. Not to fight. Just to collect what was mine. The house was quiet when I let myself in with the spare key. No one was home. I walked straight to my room and started packing. I didn't rush. I folded every item carefully. I didn't want to leave anything behind that they could claim. Not a sweater. Not a charger. Not a trace. I boxed up my old journals, the worn-out backpack I'd used since high school, the half-empty bottle of shampoo I'd bought myself. Every single item that had been mine by effort, not by gift. When I was done, I wrote something. Just 1 page. Printed it. Laid it flat on the kitchen table. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't dramatic. It was a spreadsheet. Column by column, I listed every dollar I had spent on the house in the last 3 years. Utilities. Groceries. Car repairs. Gwen Dallin's ride shares. School fees. Unreimbursed cash withdrawals for emergencies. Even the Venmo transfers for Gwen Dallin's weekly hair appointments. I totaled it at the bottom. The number came to $18,627.52. Below it, I wrote, "This is what I carried so you wouldn't have to. I'm done now." That was all. I left the page in the center of the table, on top of a clean placemat. Not buried. Not hidden. Like a receipt someone might stumble on while clearing dinner plates. Then I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. The silence said enough. By lunchtime, my phone was vibrating nonstop. I had 39 missed calls. Mom. Dad. Gwen Dallin. Even 2 of my uncles. One voicemail from Mom started with, "We didn't think you'd take it like this," and ended with, "You're blowing it out of proportion." Gwen Dallin texted me 5 times, each message more frantic than the last. "Why would you do this? Dad is freaking out. You're making things worse. Where are you? Are you serious about leaving?" I didn't answer any of them. That evening, Brianna made pasta and poured me a glass of wine. I sat across from her and said nothing for a long time. Then I asked, quietly, if someone can throw you away that fast, were you ever really family to them? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The thing is, people always say blood is thicker than water, like it means something. But water is what keeps you alive. Blood is just biology. And biology doesn't entitle you to someone's loyalty, especially not after you've sold it off piece by piece. That night, I turned my phone off. Not just silent, off. because I wanted to feel what it was like to exist without waiting for the next demand to land in my pocket. And in the quiet that followed, I didn't feel lost. I felt free. I didn't plan to say anything that first night. I just needed somewhere to land. Brianna didn't ask questions. She handed me a pillow and a blanket, pointed to the couch, and said, "We'll figure it out later." But once I sat down, I couldn't stop talking. I told her everything in one long breathless wave. Not just about the laptop or the tuition demand. I went further back. The years of quiet expectation. The money. The car. The way "thank you" had disappeared from my family's vocabulary a long time ago. By the end, I wasn't even sure what I was saying. I was just tired of holding it. She listened the whole time. Didn't interrupt, didn't rush me. Just sat there, curled up in an old hoodie, staring like I was reciting something from a documentary she couldn't believe was real. And when I finally ran out of words, she said one thing. "Do they even know who you are without what you do for them?" I didn't have an answer, because I hadn't thought about it before. That version of me, over-functioning, agreeable, always available, was the only one they'd ever really responded to. Anything outside that box got ignored, corrected, or treated like a problem to be solved. So somewhere along the line, I just stopped showing them anything else. I sat with that for a long time. The next morning, I borrowed Brianna's printer and typed the list. It wasn't emotional. Just numbers and dates. Money I'd covered. Things I'd managed. No explanations. No commentary. I placed it on the table like it was an invoice, which in a way, it was. Then I went back to the house one last time. It was early. The sun was just coming up and the street was still quiet. I let myself in with my key and moved quickly. I didn't want a scene. I wasn't angry, I was done. That's different. I packed everything I owned, which turned out to be less than I thought. Clothes, books, the spare set of car keys I'd hidden in the drawer after Gwendolyn lost the originals. A few things from the bathroom that I'd bought, but they still called ours. I took my name off the utilities online while I was standing in the kitchen. Canceled the auto pay. They'd find out soon enough. Before I left, I walked to the table and laid the printed page down in the center. I didn't write a note. I didn't sign my name. I just left it there, visible, undeniable. I didn't want them to say they didn't know. Then I closed the door behind me. No slam. No last look. It was strange how quiet it felt. Not peaceful. Not yet. But quieter than anything I'd felt in that house in years. The first few days afterward, I kept waiting to feel panic. Like maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe I'd made it worse. That's what happens when you're raised to carry things without complaint. Walking away feels wrong even when it's right. I kept checking my phone out of habit. It was full of texts from my mom, most of them in that tone that sounds almost concerned, but isn't. "You're being dramatic. We never said you had to leave. Your sister is upset. This is hurting the family." Not one message asking how I was doing. Not one acknowledgement of the birthday. Or the laptop. Or the $8,000. There was one voicemail I listened to just once. It was from Gwendolyn. She sounded more confused than angry. "Can you please just come back? I don't know why you're doing this. Dad's been weird and Mom keeps crying. I didn't ask for any of this." That part made me pause. Because she was right. She hadn't asked. She'd just received. Over and over again. And that's the thing, entitlement doesn't always come with bad intentions. Sometimes it just comes from being handed everything and never realizing someone else paid the bill. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish her. I just couldn't go back into that dynamic. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Brianna offered to let me stay as long as I needed. I found a short-term sublet a week later. Someone's cousin had gone abroad, and the rent was low. It was a tiny studio, barely room for a bed and a desk, but it was mine. I made the deposit with the last of my savings. No backup plan. Just trust in my own resourcefulness, which, ironically, they'd taught me by giving me nothing. I picked up extra hours at work and stopped checking my phone. And slowly, the panic faded. Not all at once, but enough that I could breathe again. I talked to my academic advisor about switching my course load. I dropped one class and added a remote internship that paid by the hour. It wasn't ideal, but it gave me just enough flexibility to rebuild. One afternoon, I sat down and did the math. Not just my budget, but everything. What I'd spent on my family over the last 3 years. It added up to more than what I'd have made in a full semester of work study. Rent, groceries, gas, tech, tuition. And time. So much time. The number wasn't what hurt. It was the pattern it confirmed. They didn't love me less. They just depended on me more. And they'd mistaken that dependence for closeness. For connection. But dependency without recognition isn't love. It's extraction. I started noticing how much I'd shaped myself around their needs. I was the reliable one. The fixer. The one who stayed calm. Even my voice, the way I spoke around them, quieter, less confrontational, edited. Outside that house, I wasn't like that. With friends, I had opinions. I cracked jokes. I said no. I was a whole person. They never met that version of me. I don't think they wanted to. I kept imagining what would have happened if I hadn't left. If I just paid the tuition. Laughed it off. Bought another used laptop. Gone right back to fixing everything. They would have let me. And they would have thanked me with silence. With another expectation. And one day, maybe years from now, I would have looked around and realized I'd built an entire life on top of resentment I never named. So no, I wasn't going back. That part of the story was over. But what came next, that was still mine to write. By noon, the silence I'd left behind had turned into chaos. I didn't see it, but I could feel it through the phone. The calls came in waves, first my mom, then Gwendolyn, then numbers I didn't recognize. Dad called 14 times in 1 hour, alternating between voicemails that sounded calm and measured, and ones where he barely masked the rage underneath. "You're being ridiculous. We didn't think you'd take it that way. You're punishing your family over a misunderstanding." Then quieter, "Just come home and we'll talk." But they weren't messages for me. They were for the version of me they'd known, the one who didn't let things escalate. The one who filled in the cracks, smoothed the conflict, swallowed the hurt. The one they knew they could count on to clean up the mess, even when she didn't make it. That version was gone. I didn't pick up. Not because I wanted to make a point, but because I had nothing left to explain. The note on the table wasn't a letter, it was a record. A quiet, precise accounting of everything they'd taken for granted. 5 years' worth of utility payments, car repairs, textbook reimbursements I never got, cosigns for Gwendolyn's emergencies. It wasn't even the full picture, just the things I had receipts for. At the bottom, under the final total, I wrote, "This is what I carried so you wouldn't have to." Nothing more. I left it in the one place they couldn't ignore, the kitchen table. The place where they'd planned Gwendolyn's birthday parties, mapped out college visits, held family meetings that never included me. I wanted it to sit there in plain view while they tried to eat dinner. Let them figure out how to digest that. That afternoon, Gwendolyn sent me a string of messages. "What is this? Why would you write that? Mom's crying. Dad's losing it. Are you happy now? You could have just said something to us directly." Then, after a pause, "You're seriously not coming back?" I didn't answer. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was just done protecting people from their own reflection. Later that day, Mom finally left a voicemail that wasn't performative. Her voice was tight, almost raw. "I don't even know who you are right now. You've always been the good one. The responsible one. I don't know what changed." That was the problem. Nothing had changed. I was still the responsible one. I was still the one cleaning up. The only difference was I'd finally stopped pretending it didn't cost me anything. That evening, Brianna brought takeout to my new place. It was quiet and small, noisy fridge, questionable plumbing, stained carpet, but it was mine. I hadn't told her everything that happened yet, but she didn't press. Over dinner, she said, "So what now?" I shrugged. "I guess now I find out who I am when I'm not holding everything up." She raised her glass. "To whoever that is. And to never paying for someone else's phone again." We laughed, but I felt it in my chest. A loosening. That weekend, my uncle, my dad's brother, called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. He sounded uncomfortable. Like he didn't want to be in the middle of anything, but already was. "Your parents are confused. Hurt. I think they expected you to cool down by now." I didn't say anything. I read the paper you left, he added quietly. They showed it to me. I don't think they expected the number to be that high. That wasn't the part that surprised me. What surprised me was that they had to show it to someone else, like they needed help interpreting a language they refused to learn. As if the money mattered more coming from a third-party witness than it did when it came out of my bank account. He asked if I wanted to talk to them. I said, not right now. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. You know, I always wondered how you held it together. Your dad, he's not great at recognizing what's right in front of him. Neither is your mom. But you've been the glue since you were, 15? I didn't respond. But I appreciated that someone, even peripherally, had noticed. After that, the calls slowed down. A few trickled in every couple days. Gwendolyn sent one long message about how things were weird at home and how she missed me. We don't know what to do without you, she wrote. I reread that line a few times. They didn't mean to admit it, but they had. They didn't know how to function without me. And that was the point. I started working more hours. Saved aggressively. Paid off my credit card balance. I bought a refurbished laptop, same model as the one they sold, but this one didn't carry the weight of that day with it. One afternoon, I went through my bank statements and deleted every old payment notification that still had their names attached. It felt small, but important. A clearing. Brianna and I started meal prepping on Sundays. I found a rhythm again, early shifts, evening classes, nights reading in silence. It didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like recovery. Around the 2-week mark, I got a message from Dad. No intro. Just, we're trying to keep the lights on here. If you could pitch in, we'd appreciate it. No apology. No acknowledgement of the fallout. Just a request, as if nothing had happened. I didn't respond. I just archived it. That was my answer. It hit me later that week, as I was walking home, that I hadn't cried. Not once. Not when I packed, not when I left, not even when the messages got cruel. I think part of me had done all the grieving already. Not over the people, they were still alive. But over the illusion that things would ever be different. Over the idea that if I just kept doing enough, one day they'd turn around and say, thank you. That day was never coming. And now, I didn't need it to. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want an apology carefully worded by someone else. I didn't want to be pulled back into the role they wrote for me. I wanted distance. I wanted quiet. And I wanted to learn how to exist without having to earn it. For the first time, I was starting to believe I could. Without me, the cracks didn't just show, they spread. 3 days after I left, Gwendolyn texted again. Do you know how much tuition is due by Friday? As if I had just forgotten. As if the demand wasn't the reason I walked away in the first place. I didn't answer. A week later, I heard from my cousin Josh. We weren't close, but he worked part-time at the registrar's office, where Gwendolyn went to school. He called to check in, awkwardly, like he wasn't sure if he was crossing a line. After some small talk, he mentioned there was a payment issue on Gwendolyn's account. I think your name was on the original form, so I thought you might want to know. I wasn't surprised. They had used my name for plenty of things over the years. But this time, they didn't have access. I'd already removed myself from everything I could. Closed old accounts, unlinked bank cards, canceled authorizations. The tuition didn't get paid. Gwendolyn's enrollment was flagged. By the time they noticed, it was too late. The phone she got for her birthday? It got disconnected after 2 weeks. Unpaid bill. Mom picked up night shifts again, something she hadn't done since Gwendolyn was in middle school. Dad started making the rounds, calling every relative, trying to rewrite the story. She just snapped, he told people. Walked out over nothing. Left her family to clean up the mess. But this time, the story didn't land the way it used to. Because people remembered. Uncle Jack remembered who fixed his car when Dad promised to take care of it and never showed. My aunt remembered how I covered Thanksgiving groceries 3 years in a row without being asked. Even my grandmother, the one they rarely visited, sent me a card with a crisp 20 tucked inside and a note that just said, "Heard what happened. Proud of you for standing up." It didn't fix anything. But it reminded me I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined it. The imbalance had been real and visible, even if no one had said anything before. Meanwhile, I was working 2 jobs and sharing a room in a creaky old house with 2 other girls who were barely getting by themselves. We split groceries, took turns cleaning, and sometimes talked late into the night about all the things we'd carried in silence growing up. They didn't need me to be the strong one. They just needed me to be real. I reworked my schedule so I could go back to school part-time. Picked up online courses and evening classes. I couldn't afford to take a full load yet, but I was moving forward on my own terms this time. One Saturday afternoon, I found an old notebook I hadn't seen since high school. The inside cover had a list I'd made when I was 17, goals before 25. Graduate college, get my own apartment, pay off debt, start something that's mine. Back then, those felt like stretch goals. Something to hope for while still bracing for disappointment. Now, they felt like coordinates. By month 2, my life was unrecognizable from what it had been. I wasn't fixing their chaos anymore. I was building my own order. I started waking up before sunrise just to have the kitchen to myself before the day got loud. Made coffee, sat with my laptop, worked through online lectures. There was something steadying about that hour, no demands, no emergencies, no guilt. Just me and the work. I didn't have a lot of time to think about what they were doing without me. But I heard bits and pieces. Gwendolyn tried taking on a part-time job. She quit after 3 weeks. Said the schedule was too much. Mom started complaining to mutual friends about how some people just abandon their families when it's inconvenient. Dad stopped reaching out altogether. But he wasn't quiet. I heard from Brianna that he'd cornered her at the gas station one morning. Tried to clear the air. Asked if I'd said anything about the money, as if the spreadsheet I left behind hadn't spoken clearly enough. He ended the conversation with, "She's always been dramatic. You'll see. She'll come back when she cools off." I didn't. Instead, I picked up a gig helping a local business manage their online orders. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and gave me new skills. My manager noticed I was organized, borderline obsessive, and asked if I'd ever thought about project management. I hadn't. But I started thinking about it. I researched certifications, drafted a plan, made a budget. It wasn't something I could afford right away, but it gave me something to aim for. One day, after a particularly long shift, I came home to find one of my roommates crying over her phone bill. She'd miscalculated her paycheck and couldn't cover it. She didn't ask me for help, just sat there trying to figure out what to cut next week. I handed her $20. Not because I felt obligated. Not because I needed her to like me. Just because I could. And it felt different. Back in that house, with my parents, with Gwendolyn, giving had always come with pressure. Obligation. Silence in return. But this, helping someone who didn't expect it, didn't assume it, felt lighter. My generosity wasn't the problem. The problem was being surrounded by people who saw it as a given. By the end of that semester, I had enough saved to take a full course load again. I picked up 2 certifications and started freelancing for extra cash. I wasn't wealthy. But for the first time, I wasn't in survival mode. I had room to breathe. Room to think. Room to imagine something beyond getting by. And that's when it really hit me, I hadn't just escaped a bad situation. I'd outgrown it. Their world was built on me staying small. Staying predictable. But I wasn't doing that anymore. I didn't need to prove anything to them. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't building success to show them what they missed. I was building it because I could. Because it was mine. Because they didn't get to decide who I became after I stopped making their lives easier. They were scrambling. And I was just getting started. 2 months passed before I heard from her directly. My mom. Not a message forwarded through Gwendolyn. Not an email. Not one of those vague Facebook comments on a post from 3 years ago. This time, she called me herself. Just once. No follow-up. No voicemail. A name on my screen I hadn't seen in weeks. I let it ring out. A day later, she texted. "If you're open to it, I'd like to talk. Just us. No pressure. No, we need to fix this, or your father's upset. Just a quiet ask." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. We met at a diner halfway between where I lived and where I grew up. Neutral ground. She was already sitting when I walked in, 2 mugs on the table and a coffee pot nearby. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not older, just diminished. Or maybe I'd just stopped seeing her the way I used to. We didn't hug. She started with small talk. Asked if I'd eaten. Mentioned the traffic. I let it ride for a few minutes before she finally said, without looking up, I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't respond right away. Not because I was trying to be cold, but because I didn't trust what would come out if I spoke too fast. So I stirred my coffee. Took a breath. It was, I said eventually. And for a long time. She nodded. I thought you could handle it, she said quietly. You always did. You were always so, together. That's not the same as being okay. She didn't argue. There was a long pause after that. Not tense, just unfamiliar. Like we'd both forgotten how to sit across from each other without some version of Gwendolyn between us. She didn't apologize. Not exactly. There were no tears. No big emotional breakdown. But something about the way she kept her hands folded in her lap, the way she didn't reach across the table, didn't try to touch my arm or force closeness, that told me she knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. I told her I wasn't going back. She nodded. I figured. I'm not angry, I added. But I can't pretend it didn't happen. Another nod. I don't expect you to. I didn't stay long. We talked about surface things after that, the weather, some family friend who got remarried, how she was learning to cook without dairy because of some new intolerance. It was strange. Quiet. Stripped of all the old dynamics. She didn't mention Gwendolyn. She didn't mention money. She didn't try to explain away the choices they made. She didn't try to pull me back in. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't healing. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was recognition. And that was enough. After that, she started texting me, once in a while. Not often. Just small things. A recipe I used to like. A question about what kind of coffee maker to buy. Once, a picture of an old drawing I did in middle school that she found in a box. You were always creative, she wrote. We should have encouraged that more. I didn't reply right away. But I didn't ignore it either. I didn't hear from Dad. Not directly. I assumed she didn't tell him we met. Or if she did, she didn't give details. Part of me wanted to ask. Part of me didn't care. Gwendolyn reached out once, a long message that read more like a journal entry than anything else. She talked about how hard things had been, how she'd taken on more hours at work, how everything at home felt heavy. She didn't ask for anything. Just said she hoped I was okay. Said she missed me. I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't miss the dynamic we had. But I didn't hate her either. She was a kid when it started. She didn't create the system. She just benefited from it. And while she'd never apologized, she'd stopped asking for anything. That alone felt like a shift. Still, I didn't answer. Not out of bitterness. Just space. I needed her to live in that silence for a while. Not to punish her. Just so she could feel what I had for years, the absence of being considered. Meanwhile, my life moved on. I found a rhythm with school and work that actually felt sustainable. I stopped checking my bank balance every day. I started saving again, nothing major, just enough that I didn't feel one missed shift away from disaster. I joined a study group. I even went out a few weekends in a row, something I hadn't done since high school. It was strange, building a version of myself that didn't revolve around crisis management. For the first time in my adult life, no one was calling me because something broke. Because they forgot a password or missed a deadline or lost a document they needed me to find. No one was asking me to solve anything. No one expected me to fix their mess before fixing my own. And in that silence, something else grew, room. For hobbies. For rest. For boredom. For possibility. I started thinking about things I used to like but had forgotten. I found an old sketchbook and picked up pencils again. Nothing ambitious. Just quiet moments of color and shape. I made playlists for walks. I found a local thrift store that felt like treasure hunting. The guilt didn't go away completely. Some days, it still whispered in the background. You should check on them. You should be doing more. But I'd learned to recognize that voice for what it was, the echo of a role I never asked to play. One morning, I got a text from my mom. Just a photo. Her in the backyard, coffee in one hand, flowers blooming behind her. Thinking of you. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. It's been a year. I still remember the text. The one that broke everything clean. I still remember the way my hands didn't shake, how I didn't cry, how I just moved. Packed, walked out, started over. It should have felt like a collapse. But it didn't. It felt like air. Now, I wake up early most mornings, not because I have to, but because I like the quiet. I make coffee, sit at the little desk I bought secondhand, and open my used laptop. It's not the best model, battery's questionable, a few keys are sticky, but it's mine. Paid for with money no one else can claim. My schedule's full, but steady. I work 2 part-time jobs, go to class, and study in between. Some days I'm tired, but it's a clean kind of tired. No resentment built in. No one asking where I am or what I'm doing or why I haven't fixed their problem yet. My time belongs to me. I started tracking my hours differently, not just work, but the rest. Time spent walking to class. Time spent making dinner. Time spent doing absolutely nothing without guilt. That part took the longest to relearn. Not filling every moment with usefulness. Just existing. There's a kind of peace now that I didn't know was possible. It's not the dramatic kind. Not silence and sunsets and perfect routines. It's subtler. Knowing no one's going to call and demand money on a Thursday. Knowing no one's going to sell something that's mine and tell me to be grateful. Knowing that if I say no, it sticks. My boundaries aren't announcements anymore. They're just built in. Gwendolyn still hasn't gone back to school. Her tuition never got paid. From what I hear, she's working retail and still living at home. We haven't spoken. She sent one message on my birthday, a short, "Hope you're good." I didn't reply. Not out of bitterness. Just clarity. She knows where I am. She knows how to say more, if she ever wants to. Dad's version of the story hasn't changed. If anything, it's gotten more dramatic. He tells people I cut the family off over a misunderstanding. He says I turned cold, that I used to be the heart of the family, and then one day I just wasn't. But people don't really buy it anymore. They've seen the pattern. They've seen the way he shifts blame, how quick he is to rewrite history. How every problem somehow starts when someone stops doing things for him. The shine is wearing off. I don't feel the need to correct him. I used to think I had to defend myself. Prove my side of the story. Make people understand. But now? I don't need anyone to validate what I lived through. I don't need a family reunion to declare me right. I don't need an apology with just the right wording to feel whole. What I needed was to stop giving people the power to decide who I was. I've done that. There's still fallout, of course. Traces of who I had to be still show up sometimes. When someone thanks me and I instinctively downplay it. When I over-explain a boundary like I'm trying to preempt their disappointment. When I say I'm fine before I even check if it's true. But it's less now. Softer. Easier to catch. A few months ago, I got an email about a scholarship I applied for late last year. I'd forgotten I even submitted it. Turns out, they picked me. Full coverage for the next 2 semesters. I reread the email 3 times before it sank in. I forwarded it to Brianna with no subject line. She called me immediately. Screamed into the phone. We went out that night. Nothing fancy, just tacos and cheap drinks. But I remember sitting across from her, laughing until I couldn't breathe, and thinking, this is what support looks like when it's not transactional. No one keeping score. No guilt. Just celebration. I thought about texting my mom. I didn't. I still might. One day. She and I talk occasionally. Always light. Recipes, old shows we used to watch, updates about a cousin's baby. She hasn't brought up money since that day at the diner. She doesn't ask about Gwendolyn. She doesn't mention Dad. It's not closeness. But it's something. A neutral piece. She sees the difference, I think. And she respects the line. I've started thinking more long-term again. I used to be afraid to make plans, afraid they'd get hijacked by someone else's emergency. But now I'm making a list. Not the same one I made when I was 17. A new one. Goals before 30. Finish school without debt, move into my own apartment, travel alone once, start something creative again. Just for me, the list isn't impressive. But it's mine. No one else's fingerprints on it. That birthday? The one where everything cracked open? It doesn't hurt the way I thought it would. Sometimes I forget about it completely. Other times, I think about how different that day could have gone, how I might have laughed off the text, wired the money, and gone back to pretending everything was fine. That version of the story would have been easier in the short term. But long term? It would have been a slow erosion. The kind that doesn't show until one day you realize you've disappeared. So no, that birthday wasn't a loss. It was an ending. And the beginning of something better. Now when people ask about my family, I keep it simple. I say we're not close, but we're in touch. If they press, I change the subject. Not because I'm hiding anything. Just because some stories don't need to be told to everyone. Some stories are for you and the people who earn them. I've learned who those people are now. And more importantly, I've learned how to be one of them for myself. Thanks for watching. Have you ever had to walk away from people who expected everything but gave nothing back? How did you find the strength to stop explaining and start protecting your peace? Drop your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if this hit home, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the real glow up is walking away.